Have you ever been stumbling through the internet and come across a game that hasn't received much attention that really catches your eye? You're immediately interested and you want to know more about the game. And then you finally get your hands on that game and you feel like you just found this treasure, this hidden gem. That's how I felt about LEGRAND LEGACY. LEGRAND LEGACY presents itself as a game fueled by nostalgia and executed with care. It feels like a JRPG from the PS1 and PS2 era of gaming, in the best possible way. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review for LEGRAND LEGACY. Let's start out with the combat system. As you can see, the game follows a traditional turn-based JRPG approach. When you select an offensive magic or physical attack, the game will present the player with a wheel. The player must try and hit the presented button within the wheel in the presented area that it gives you. So if the player can hit that button within that smaller, brighter area, this will help your attack in many ways, the accuracy and maybe some damage that you're going to be dealing with it. I understand there are some that are just not fans of essentially completing a QuickTime button press for their attacks. And while this is true, I do think that the system is very similar to another JRPG called Lost Odyssey, where in that game you essentially had to hold down the right trigger to try and get the circle to match the circle on your enemy, and this would essentially improve your attack. While I wouldn't want to see QuickTime events used in all JRPGs, I do think it adds a little bit more urgency to the fights. Plus, I find it fun to try and get my indicator to land in the perfect section each time I perform an attack. I could see this as more of an issue for people if this meant that to land a good hit, you would have to get within that perfect zone. But if you can just get within that good zone, you will probably land your hit and you can get consistent good hits without getting the perfect score. Healing and buff magic do not work with the QuickTime button press. Once you select a healing spell, the spell will land, which I think was a great move on their part. Combat encounters provide you with a means to guard against incoming attacks, swapping out party members on the fly, and executing character-specific special moves. Attacking enemies and guarding will allow the character to essentially build up an energy bar, and once the energy bar is full, the character can then execute their special move. Many of these characters have some really cool special moves that do a lot of great damage to the enemies, and they're especially useful on some of the tougher foes. One character has the ability to heal your entire party and give you every single passive buff in the book. I always keep her in my party just for that reason. The special moves, along with the attacks in the game, are visually satisfying to execute. Whether it's a magic attack or a special move, you always enjoy seeing what these characters are going to present. The game lets you choose between 3 characters for combat and their placement on the battlefield. So there's essentially 2 lines, the front providing a bit more attack power bonus to the characters that are there, and then in the back you get a defensive bonus. On top of this, you can swap out characters mid-battle. I really like this as an option because it really lets you change up your strategies on the fly. You're able to really use your entire team instead of just taking a fraction of them. You can really utilize all of them within a battle. In some of the harder fights, I would change my characters out to have a certain character provide a buff move or exchange a bunch of attacks and then exchange him back out for another character to bring in some of the other people that I want to land those attacks. There's a lot of strategies that you can come up with, and on top of this, the game isn't a pushover either, with the game being pretty tough from the beginning. I found the combat so enjoyable that I didn't mind doing some grinding to improve my character's abilities and make them stronger for future fights. The combat hooked me from the first fight, and that enjoyment carried through the rest of the game. But there's more to this game than just a good combat system. There's a story here as well. There's 3 things that the story does right at the beginning of the game. It creates an initial sense of mystery about our main character, has a good sense of place so that you understand the situations people are in, but you want to know more about the world, and finally, Good pacing. The story doesn't waste any time in the beginning and sets up a small and simple story which gets the players interested in the narrative while quickly getting to the combat. I think this was a smart idea that since this is a rather long game, it's a good idea to try and effectively hook the player right from the start. Some games require some slow burn hours until the game gets to the good bits, and some games are just plain slow. This game is neither. It's good right from the start screen. While the story starts off small, I do find this as a good approach to acclimate the player to the game world. The story does eventually turn into the cliched story used in many JRPGs of having you have to stop a major threat and save the world. Along the way, you'll gather more party members with their own stories, and I think this is really where the story really succeeds. The characters and their personal stories and conflicts. Finn is that likable good guy, and sometimes a bit of an idiot, and he also doesn't know much about his past, so he's seeking to help people and find those answers about himself. He sees the most development within himself for the last third of the game. It really works because the first 2/3 really cements him in his ways, and then he starts to change towards the last third of the game. Sasha presents herself as the more experienced person in the group and likes to tease the other party members by speaking in riddles, especially when you first meet her. Further into the story, secrets are revealed about her, and she is humanized and becomes much more well-rounded as a character. Arya struggles with being a leader, and with people. Some of her interactions with Finn are rather funny, and I enjoy seeing these two characters grow with each other. Azam is the likable, fierce warrior character who regrets the lives he was forced to take in the gladiator arena. He does act as a force of inspiration for some of the characters, along with some of the side characters in the group. He also has a really interesting backstory. Many of the characters are flawed in some way, and they're trying to battle with their own inner demons along with completing their mission. This makes them feel more like people. Across the main journey, the characters will have their own personal demons to tend with, along with helping to solve the region conflicts that are going on. I really enjoyed these parts in the game as it helped to show the good growth with our characters, along with them trying to work as a team, and the conflicts that might come with that. I like that the story addressed that many of these characters didn't know each other before and they haven't worked with each other, so they aren't naturally going to be this well-oiled machine as a team, and I like seeing them butt heads continuously throughout the game and then try to work through those differences. You see friendships born and leaders rise throughout these conflicts. This all feeds into your investment with them and the world as a whole. While I thoroughly enjoyed the journey of the narrative, I did have issues with the ending, but we'll get into that in just a bit. Also, without revealing anything, the game surprised me in a few instances that provided a twist that I haven't seen in a JRPG in a long time. While the meat of the gameplay will come from exploring the new dungeons and environments, along with battling the many monsters the game does provide, there's also a lot of side activities to do. As you progress throughout the game, you'll eventually earn your own home base. The base provides narrative reason for holding it, as it provides a strategic location for anyone who has it. Along with that, there's a lot of side activities to do there. You can duel with individuals, and you'll need to learn the correct counter moves to land a hit and counter your opponent, or you can do what is essentially a memory game. While I enjoyed this more than the dueling, both won't hold your attention for very long. What I did really enjoy was the hack and slash minigame. Essentially, you're thrown into an arena and must defeat as many enemies as possible as the waves get increasingly more difficult. It's a nice change of pace to the turn-based combat, and this mode is really good for some quick fun. Most of these minigames will net you with funds that you can use to then gain useful items that can help with crafting new weapons or boosting your character stats, so they don't feel like time wasters, but rather means to improve your character. If you do not want to take part in the minigames, you can complete the side quests available throughout the game. So some of the side quests do have some decent stories, but most of them boil down to going to a certain area, collecting an item, or going to an area and then defeating a certain enemy. The most compelling of the side content, though, are the gladiator fights that you can participate in. These net you with some great rewards and provides you with some of the most fun fights in the game. You gain access to the gladiator arena about halfway through the story, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I pretty much put the main story on hold until I beat all the gladiator fights. Some of them are pretty tough, but I wanted the rewards that they provided. They also provide a lot of experience for your party. You are even given the option to repeat the fights if you want additional rewards. I found this section of the game really addictive and very rewarding. I ended up doing the Gladiator Arena so much that I ended up walking through some of the story fights that followed this instant because I was so powerful. But the game didn't let me feel powerful for long, as some of the main enemies wouldn't really give me trouble, but when I got to the boss fights, they were always challenging. Lastly, the game provides a strategy RPG of types for certain conflicts that take place on this war map. These are very different from the main turn-based battles and reminded me a bit of Fire Emblem. You move with your team throughout the map and you must try and take out the opposing team. You do have to contend with fog of war and the danger of losing a party member if they fall in battle. These are fun and they net you your own rewards. There are more of these used in the last fourth of the game, and one particular strategy encounter does feel really epic because of the story events that take place in that encounter. While I didn't love all the side content, I did find a lot to enjoy, and I'm glad that they tried different ways to entertain us with these different mini-games than just the main narrative. The game's graphics are not going to blow you away, but the hand-drawn backgrounds definitely might. These are gorgeous and they really add to the uniqueness to the look of the game. Along with that, the game backs that up with a good variety of environments, from sandy areas to forests and other locations. The backgrounds effectively present a unique style while presenting the immersion of the game world within a fantasy setting. It's a good stylistic choice. I only have great things to say about the soundtrack. One piece of music that is very important to a JRPG is the battle theme. Over anything else, this track must be one of the best tracks, because as the player, you're going to hear this track the most throughout the game because you're continuously going to be entering fights. I'm happy to say that LEGRAND doesn't just deliver on the battle theme, but on many of its other soundtracks as well. The game has some good emotional pieces that play during some of the campfire scenes in the game, and they definitely add to the mood and atmosphere. The game has a wide range of bombastic pieces to slower and softer pieces. Just take a listen. Here's some of the pieces from the main game. Music becomes a character within the game, and it's one of the best parts about the presentation. While I enjoyed my time with LEGRAND Legacy, I did encounter some flaws as I played the game. Some of the story beats can get very long-winded with a lot of exposition in many of the sequences. While there isn't enough to hurt the game, it is noticeable. I experienced some minor performance issues with some load stuttering, and the game takes a long time to load from your initial boot up. Thankfully, fast traveling loading doesn't take that long. The game does have backtracking, which is essentially seen in many of the side quests, and I know that might aggravate some. It didn't really bother me, as each location had its own look and music, so it was just an excuse to then see those backgrounds again and then get all wrapped up into that soundtrack. As I mentioned before, I wasn't a fan of the dueling fencing minigame, and thankfully after its first use in the story mode, it's only restricted to side content after that. The game did freeze at a black screen for me during the game, and then the LEGRAND Legacy Discord community informed me it was a bug and gave me a workaround pretty quickly, and they said that they were working on a patch to iron this out so it didn't happen to anyone else. I have to give some props to the community because they were pretty quick to give me an answer along with the developers. There is a dungeon that appears later in the game that's in this snow environment. The trick is that as you walk around, you'll slowly freeze to death, so you need to move from fire to fire to stay warm. This is fine, but what gets frustrating is that the environments here look very samey, and as you get colder, your character's movement speeds start to slow down even more, which makes it hard for you to dodge enemies. So this all results in you getting into many battles that you probably didn't want to get into as you're trying to figure out how to get out of here. It was really frustrating, and I do think a few tweaks to the movement speed could really help this area out. There's two comments that I want to make about the story. One is that the ending provides the very minimal amount of closure a game could provide. Honestly, it felt a bit like Mass Effect 3's situation that was going on here, where I felt like they forgot to put a real ending into the game. I actually brought this up with the developers on their Discord, and they answered me by saying that they were working on additional scenes that they wanted to add in to provide closure to all the major players. I really commend them for doing this. Now, this closure should have been in the game at launch, but I do really have to commend developers for fixing an issue with their story and probably making it better as a whole. In addition, they informed me that they would love to do a sequel at some point in the future, and I really hope they do. Lastly, I felt like the main villain wasn't that memorable. The game does decide to use the villain as narrative motivation and something for the characters to stop, and the narrative decides to focus on the characters and their journey as they're battling their own demons and learning to work together as a team. If they do a sequel, I would love to see a compelling villain written here, one that really challenges our heroes. I love this game. As I ventured further into the game, my ears found new music tracks to enjoy, my eyes soaked up all the beautiful backgrounds. These both do a great job of selling the game's visual and audio style. The unique presentation is backed up with a solid narrative and great traditional JRPG gameplay. Yes, I've experienced games like this before, but LEGRAND LEGACY returned me to a time in JRPGs that I've been nostalgic for. But this game doesn't just rely on its nostalgia, but rather uses it as a foundation and then builds a memorable game on top of it. If you've experienced JRPGs in the 90s and early 2000s, you owe it to yourself to play this game. This was made for you. It's currently out on the PC with a Switch release coming later this year, and then the game is coming to PS4 and Xbox One in 2019. Whether you play the game now or on your system of choice, LEGRAND LEGACY is a game you will not want to miss.